All right, we are recording now. I think this is session 21 or 22 or something like that. Just This by Richard Rohr. And once again, if you're just viewing us, viewing the archives, and you would like to consider joining us live, all of the links and everything you need, information you need is in the comments section. So take a look at that. And we would love to have you with us so that we can actually talk at you and hear you back. That would be great. But if you want to lurk, that's okay too. All right. I wanted to do something a little different tonight, at least to start with, because last week, the section that we were talking about, the whole is in the parts, we ended up having a bit of a discussion about theism, pantheism, and panentheism. And we were talking about those different cosmological views. Theism, where God is separate from his creation, and is involved in it but separate from. Pantheism was the idea that God is the universe, God is the creation, or the universe is God's body, if you will, so that God is that tree, God is that rock. And then panentheism is kind of a cross between the two. God is part of, or so the universe is part of God, and God infuses it, but they are separate. And we were talking about this because Richard Rohr has that idea um, of God being infused in nature, infused in creation. And when we're interacting with uh, creation, nature, and others in any way, we're actually interacting with God. And he carried that through with St. Augustine and Paul and was drawing those conclusions. I ran across a clip from Thomas Merton. And if any of you know me well at all, you know that Thomas Merton is, one of my, suppose you say, mentors and role models from afar. There was a point that I wanted to be Thomas Merton and was just trying to emulate him in any way that I could and read a lot of his works and whatnot. If you're not familiar with Merton, he is a Trappist monk who wrote his autobiography in the late 40s that just kind of set the United States on fire a bit, at least among returning GIs from World War II. They came back from the war completely disillusioned, and here is this autobiography that just gave them a sense that there was meaning and purpose possible in contemplative practice. And interestingly enough, the Gethsemane, or the Abbey at Gethsemane, Kentucky, where Thomas Merton lived and worked, became besieged with young men who wanted to join the order to the extent that they had to put up tents all throughout the grounds to house everybody that was showing up. It became so popular. Thomas Merton himself became the novice master, and so he was teaching the first years and the novices. And so, gosh, it's getting to be 8 or 9 years ago when Frank Billman and I went on a silent retreat in the Tucson desert, and they had a little library there. And I ran across the first audio recordings of Thomas Merton that I ever heard. And it's so interesting that you've been reading someone for a decade and then you suddenly hear their voice, right? And it wasn't, it wasn't what I was expecting. He has kind of a high-pitched voice, kind of unremarkable. And he's just a regular guy. Just the way that he talked, it was just so colloquial and kind of humorous. And it was so much different than what you would expect, when you've kind of idolized someone for a few years. But I ran across this little clip and I want to play it for you because what he's talking about is going to, I think, follow along pretty well with what we were talking about in terms of panentheism and this idea of God being infused into creation and how we can interact and how we can relate. So let me play this for you, and then we'll talk about it. What I'm going to do, I'm sharing the screen. You should be seeing a black screen. Do you see a black screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to play a little bit of it, and you tell me if you can hear the audio. It starts immediately, so then I'll back it up and we'll start again. But tell me if you can hear his voice well enough.
Now, what this does, and I know.
Is that going to be loud enough for y'all?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, they gave no they gave no introduction here. This is his last address to the new monks at the Abbey before he went into the Hermitage. In 1965, he died in 68, but in 1965, he was finally allowed by the Abbey to move into a hermitage. It was just a little just a little one-room building on a remote part of the monastery's property. And he lived in that hermitage for the next several years until he went on his Asian tour where he was killed. But at any rate, so this is his last address, and this is just a little 3-minute clip, but take a listen.
Now, what this does, and I know so far from what experience I have of it, it does, it means that in fact, it is sometimes possible to see that actually things become transparent, see, so that they are no longer opaque, and they no longer hide God. And this is true. The thing that we have to face is that life is this simple. See, we are living in a world that is absolutely transparent, and God is shining through it all the time. See? And this is not just a fable or a nice story, it is true. See? And this is something we're not able to see. But if we abandon ourselves to Him and forget ourselves, we see it sometimes, and we see it maybe frequently. See? That God manifests Himself everywhere, in everything. In people, and in things, and in nature, and in events, and so forth. So that it becomes very obvious that He is everywhere, and He's in everything, and we can't be without Him. You cannot be without God. It's impossible. See? It's just simply impossible. The only thing is that we don't see it. See? Now, this is again what we're here for. And what is it that makes the world opaque and makes it not transparent anymore? It is care. See? Because everything becomes opaque in proportion as we regard it as an individual object, and we become concerned with it. See? There's this individual thing. There's this day that I have to live through. It's a particular day, isn't it here? And so it's opaque. See? It comes to me. It comes to me in a big opaque package, see? And I spend my time opening it up. And then when I've taken all the package apart, then it's the evening. It's the examination of conscience, and I examine myself. And I took off all the paper off the package, and there wasn't anything in it. And then then the next day comes along, and that's what we do. And then a big event comes. See, I don't know. I get the job of teaching something to the rabbits, and then this becomes a great thing, and I take the paper off of this piece by piece by piece, to sort of, and then there's nothing in it either. Well, you have to leave the rabbits what they are, rabbits. If you just see that they're rabbits, you suddenly see that they're transparent, and that the rabbitness of God is shining through in all these darn rabbits. See, and that the people are transparent, and that the humanity of God is transparent in people. See, and that you don't have to take each person as an opaque package. See, who is the mystery of this crazy person here? That I have to analyze this person. See. And I have to look across the choir and what makes that guy tick? See? Well, you don't have to know what makes the man tick. All you've got to see is that he is a manifestation of the humanity of God. There is humanness, manness in God, which is manifested by every human being. Not only by the fact that he's a creature of God, but by the fact that he's redeemed in Christ. See? So now this, again, is our life, and this is what it's for. Now, this doesn't become apparent as long as we try to love the world for its own sake.
Okay. Now, I don't know how much of that really came across. So I just want to just take some time and break it down just a bit. And let me turn this off because it's distracting. What he's saying is that we live in a transparent world, and that God is shining through that world in everything that is. Every person, the way he said, the humanity of God shines through the humans that are living here. And the rabbitness of God, I love that. The rabbitness of God shines through in the rabbits that we see. And he's shining through everything. And you can't ever be without God. It's impossible to be without God. He's in everything. But we can't see this unless we abandon ourselves, unless we forget ourselves enough so that we can just see what's there and then see God shining through that transparency. But since we don't see, he says everything appears opaque to us. So what makes it opaque? and this is something I had to listen to a couple of times. He says, what makes it opaque is care. Care. And that's maybe not the best word. Maybe preoccupation would be a better word for us to understand what he means by care. Because as he develops it, he said, it's opaque when we regard an individual object and look at that object, become concerned with it, become preoccupied with it. And as we would say, bring all of our focus to a point on it. That's how we define a thought. Remember, we're defining a thought as all our focus coming to a point on one thing to the exclusion of everything else. Therefore, we're no longer present. We're only present to that thing. So he calls it becoming opaque. And then he has that wonderful analogy of as soon as we have focused on this one thing, it comes to us in this opaque package. And then we spend all our time slowly untying, unwrapping, and peeling off all the paper. And when we get down to completely opening this package, there's nothing in it. Because all we've been doing is focusing on our thoughts as we're caring about considering this thing, whatever it is. And so the antidote to that is seeing everything as a whole. Remember, we were talking about holons last week. The idea that the individual thing is part of the whole and the whole is part of the thing. And so you can't really separate the two. But as soon as we do, as soon as we look at the individual thing and really are thinking about it and analyzing it, then everything is opaque and we don't see God shining through. But when we step back from that and we just allow everything to wash over us and we're not thinking about it again, that's when it connects. So this idea that God is in everything and shining through everything and the world is transparent until we bring all of our thoughts to a focus and consider this one individual thing, then it becomes opaque. I went to visit someone and they had this really high-end home down near the Ritz-Carlton in Dana Point. And they were showing me in the bathroom, which was joining the master bath, there is a floor to ceiling window between the bathroom and the master bath, which seems a little bit inconvenient, right? But he said, watch this. He presses a button and the window goes milk. Just goes to milky opaque, opacity. And then he presses the button again and it goes clear. It was the wildest thing. I've heard of these kind of windows, but I've never seen one before. But that sounds to me exactly like what Merton's talking about. As soon as we focus, the whole world just goes to milk opacity. And if we step away from our thoughts and we allow everything to just be one thing, then it goes clear again. But God is in everything and everyone. I just thought it was a really interesting way of looking at this. And I don't know if his imagery is helping or hurting, but there it is. Any thoughts on that, all that stuff? All right, then Merton explained it perfectly. Or confused the heck out of you, one or the other. Is something like that helpful at all? Because what we're trying to do is continue to circle in on contemplative practice and circle in on what we're doing when we're trying to really clear the decks to be able to be fully present and aware. Is something like that helpful, or does it seem unnecessarily complicated? I don't know.
I find it helpful, newbie still, but I find it helpful, but also then having you provide kind of additional framework around it. So it's almost like you're annotating, and I've found that really helpful.
I like it because it, in terms of our desire and whatever actions we take to become more present, I like it because it's reciprocal, because God is present everywhere, omnipresent. Beth and I just made a note, but we had told you a story once before about a young man, a friend of our daughter's who had passed away. And one of his last episodes, he was restless in the process of dying, and he kind of raised up in bed and his eyes were wide open, and his wife said, for whatever reason, she just said, "Do you see God?" And his answer was yes. and he's everywhere and in everything. So
Mhm.
that's spectacular.
For the last few weeks, this idea of God's choices as finished products has been coming more and more to the fore. And if you've noticed on Sundays, I've been kind of harping on this issue for the last few Sundays, trying to get it across and maybe reinforcing myself as well. You know, we're always praying to God for something. We're always asking for things. We're always maybe waiting for God to act in certain ways because we look out and we see the incompletion, you know, either in our lives, in the world itself. The world seems to be going off the rails, and God, can't you fix it? All these things that we're always asking for, and yet when it really comes down to it, God has already acted. He's acted since the beginning of time, since the beginning of this whole space-time bubble that we've been living in for billions of years now. He already acted. And I suppose from God's point of view, all of time is a singularity. It's just one blip anyway. So there's been no time that has elapsed. But there's nothing to wait for. There's nothing to ask God for. Everything is already done. The table is laid. The banquet is set. Every tool we could possibly need is already here. All we have to do is accept it, pick it up and run with it, and do the things that we need to do to get clearer and clearer and see more and more transparently that it's already all here. There's nothing to wait for. In fact, if you're waiting for something, then you're not in kingdom. If you're waiting for something, you're not present to what is right here, right now. The whole idea of everything being now and being enough is that experience of kingdom. And I think that's what Merton is driving at. It's what Rohr is driving at. You know, it's all here. It's all transparently available. We're the ones that make it opaque. We're the ones who aren't completing the circuit, you know, if you want to use that analogy. And so more and more, all what we're doing here is trying to learn how to close the circuit. How do we complete that? How does the current continue to flow through us if we're the dielectric right now? If we're the rubber-soled shoes that are blocking the current, you know, how do we take our shoes off so we can actually be part of the flow? And that's what this is really all about. It's that simple and that difficult at the same time. But it's all up to us. You know, we keep asking for God for things, but God has already said, I've done everything I can do. You know, it's all here. So it's our turn, in other words. So that has been coming more and more strongly to me. And I know I've been harping on it, but I'm seeing it in this writing. I'm seeing it in that clip from Merton. And maybe it's, you know, kind of like when you decide to buy a certain model of car, you see it everywhere. Maybe that's what's going on in my little noodle too. But at any rate, trying to get that across more and more.
You know, I like and have resonated with that whole thing. And I think I've spoken about this probably in the other group that we're in, but how my relationship with God is less about petitionary communication and more about if there is a request, it's more help me become aware of your presence, because it's not, you know, whatever it's anyways. So I resonate with what you just said. And I wonder, because we do it, you do it at the beginning of the Bible study or the book study, we do it at the end. Where does petitionary prayer, how is that helpful? And is there a place for that? I guess is what I'm wondering, because I think we all fall into petitionary prayer when we see loved ones suffering or when we're suffering. It's our heart's cry for something greater than us. I think it's natural for us to go there, when the reality is there's no place to go. God is already within us. So it comes back to, for me, you know, help me see, you know, open my eyes, help me. And more, maybe that petitionary prayer is more for my own awareness, you know, and for my own mindset. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I'm right with you, Danielle. I'll tell you what, you know, with Miriam was telling me this morning that her lungs were crackling. It's like, it's natural to say, you know, God, help us, help her. You know, we want this healing. We want that for Linda, whatever. And if one of my kids was in ICU, you bet that I'd be praying and asking. That's what we do, you know. And I think life is an oscillation. It's never steady state. We're alternating current. We're always moving back and forth. And I think Jesus portrays that perfectly in the Garden of Gethsemane. Father, if there's any way that I don't have to go through this, you know, please take this cup away from me. And then after a night of sweating blood, right, he comes back to not my will, but yours be done. And so he comes back into confluence again. He comes back into oneness again. And I think that is the human dance. I think that's what we do. We ask for things and then we come back, if we come back. It's not that there's anything wrong with petitionary prayer. It's beautiful and it's what we should be doing at times. But if we can balance that now with the other realization that there's nothing left to wait for, it's all here, then we can make the oscillation back. The problem is we go into petitionary mode and we're waiting for things, and we'll do that for the rest of our lives, you know, until we have a near-death experience like Brady and Patricia and realize it's all there. And then we come back and we're still waiting, however that works. But but I think it's always going to be that. It's always going to be the back and forth. But what we're trying to do is make sure that we pull the pendulum back. And it might seem like we're pulling it too far, that I'm overemphasizing the finished work here. But where it needs to be is somewhere in a balance in the middle between the two. Because we're always going to experience life as now and not yet here in this life. And it's the not yet part that, of course, it preoccupies us if we're not careful. And that's the petitionary part. But if we can also balance that with the now part, that this moment is enough and is everything, then we can start to negotiate the primary paradox, I think, of the human condition, which is living between the now and the not yet, living between heaven and earth.
Yeah, that liminal space. And how does capturing that, how does leaning into that inform how I might respond to something as opposed to react? You know, how does that inform my behavior? So playing with that for me, you know, has been a worthwhile pursuit.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. I finally got a handle on petitionary prayer. I wrote a journal entry about it that I put in the Fifth Way book. And I realized that petitionary prayer wasn't kind of some magical intercession that was going to make something else happen, but it was a connection point between me and that thing out there, those people there. It connected me in every way, emotionally and spiritually and in any other way that I could be connected in that moment. And I felt the connection point. Whether or not it affected the outcome of the prayer was almost irrelevant to the connection that I felt in saying the prayer. So if that helps.
You know, I want to say that when you were discussing the petitionary prayer, I was thinking about how do I petition God in my prayers, and I have to say that my petition to Him is that I pray for His will for whatever person or situation, and that His will be done, and then say a prayer of gratitude. Now, are those interrelated at all? Are they opposites? Or I don't ask for a lot of things. You know, for example, with Linda, you know, I have positioned my prayer to Him. I have petitioned for comfort, for her comfort, and for His will to be done with her, and the gratitude for the fact that He is there.
Well, John, I think if you can pray a prayer of petition and really mean it, and in the next breath, pray a prayer of gratitude and really mean it, you're in the perfect balance of now and not yet. I mean, what else gets better than that, man? That's beautiful.
Effect.
Yeah, that's it. I think that's it. That's Jesus in the garden, right? I really want this. I'm really afraid of this. But at the end, I come back into a sense of peace and connection and
Good.
gratitude.
Thank you.
That is the human condition, as best as we can balance it, I think.
Mm.
All right, so let's
Dave,
read. Go ahead. Yeah.
You had clarified a word here that I was curious about. You said the opaqueness becomes real when you care. Is that what he said?
That's what he said. What makes the world opaque was the question. And he said, it is care. And
It is care.
I had to go back and listen to that a couple of times. Did he really say care? Because it sounded like care, but what care really? Because we think of care as something positive, right? But the way he was using care was more like a preoccupation. It was more like we're concerned about this one thing. We're focused on this one thing. And as we do that, then everything goes opaque because now we're shelled off at the level of our thoughts, our concern, our preoccupation with this one thing, whatever it happens to be at the moment.
But I'm
It's,
thinking,
interesting.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, no, it's just an interesting kind of word study. That is, if it matters to you, then it becomes matter to you.
Ooh,
Ooh, I like
that's
that.
good.
Yeah.
And applying that to God himself.
I'm working on
Right.
how that how that applies.
Say a little bit
No,
more, William.
Like the idea of if God matters to you, then he becomes real to you. He becomes.
Here's the thing, William. I know you're saying that in a positive sense, but really it's still just as negative as looking at the rabbit. Because as soon as we attach a name to God, we're no longer present to God. We
Right.
are now considering just what we think we know about God. And so I think it's the same thing. When we're really, truly present to something, we're not thinking about it. We have stepped back. It's like, do you remember those magic eye pictures that they used to sell back 20 years ago? And it's like you look at it, it's just a bunch of lines and pointillism and just a bunch of junk. But if you stood back and you let your eyes relax, kind of cross a little bit, suddenly you'd see this 3D image that would appear. It's kind of like that. When we're focused on something, we don't see anything. It's opaque. But as soon as we just step aside and stop trying so hard and relax, then everything kind of comes into focus. Or as Merton would say, it becomes transparent again. It's kind of like that, but it's like that with God too. So I like what, the saying that Brady just gave us. If it matters to you, it becomes matter to you. It becomes opaque to you. You can't see through it anymore. You're just going to see the reflection off the surface rather than what's really inside. That's a great line. Put that one on your fridge. Okay, so I should probably read something so that I don't get in trouble with Ellen, because she's the monitor of how far we go. It used to be Frank, but Ellen has picked up the mantle for Frank. So we're on page 37. This is the God of the interruptions. And I think this is going to flow really well from what we were just talking about. This idea that God still has to ambush us. And the only way he can do that is when we've stepped away and now we're seeing the 3D dinosaur in the pointillism thing. So in Mark 13, 33 to 35, Jesus tells his disciples, be awake, be alert. You do not know when the Lord of the house is coming, whether in the evening or at midnight or at cockcrow or in the morning. Most of us probably hear such a passage as if it were threatening or punitive, as if Jesus is saying, you'd better do it right or I'm going to get you. But Jesus is not talking about a judgment. He's not threatening us or talking about death. He's talking about the forever coming of Christ, the eternal coming of Christ. Now, and now, and now. Best of all, God's judgment is actually redemption. But we must first know that at the soul level. Christ is always coming. God is always present. It's we who aren't. Jesus tells us to always be ready, to be awake, to be fully conscious and expectant. It's the key to all spirituality because we usually aren't. Most of us just repeat the same routines every day, and we're upset if there are any interruptions to our patterns. Yet, God is invariably and ironically found in the interruptions, the discontinuities, the exceptions, the surprises, and seldom in the patterns. God has to literally catch us off guard. I often say to myself, just this, even amidst the things I don't want, I don't expect, and sometimes don't like, in the evening or at midnight or at cock crow or in the morning. All right. Some great concepts introduced in that little bit. Let's go back to the beginning and just break it down a little bit. So he's telling his disciples to be awake and be alert. You do not know when the Lord of the house is coming, whether at evening or at midnight or at cockcrow or in the morning. Now, most of us hear a passage, such a passage, as if it were threatening or punitive, as if Jesus is saying, you better do it right or I'm going to get you. I would also add that we, reading this, tend to look at this as an end times statement, or at least at the moment of our death type of statement, that at the end of things, if we're not ready, then we're going to get it. Because of the way that we've been raised, because of the way that Western Christianity has taught us, about original sin, about God's judgment, about all this and that. So we're going to put this out in the future someplace. That's just naturally what we do, And of course, it's sort of written that way. We don't know at what time in the future the master is coming back, or in this case, that Jesus is coming back, the second coming, if we're going to look at it in terms of the parousia or whatever. But we're still separating it in time. And then he's going to give us a different take on that in a second. But Jesus is not talking about a judgment, not in the way that we think of a judgment. He's not threatening us or talking to us about death. He's talking to us about the forever coming of Christ, the eternal coming of Christ, now and now and now. And so this is that idea that when we read in the New Testament that the kingdom of God is at hand, is the way that it'll typically be translated. That word in the Aramaic and actually in the Greek as well has both the meaning of being near or having already arrived. And it's especially strong in the Aramaic, that it's already arrived. And so to translate it at hand as if there's still a separation in time gives us the wrong impression. What Jesus is saying is the kingdom is here. The kingdom is now. Mark 1:15, the waiting is over, the kingdom is here. Well, that's my translation, but it's normally not translated that way. It's normally that the kingdom is at hand, as if we're still waiting for it. It's not quite here yet, but it's close. But like I just said, if you're waiting for something, you're not in the kingdom, because the kingdom is always now. What Jesus is literally telling us is don't wait anymore. There's nothing to wait for. Everything is already here. Everything is now. And that changes everything. And so this idea of waiting for Jesus to return is the wrong idea as well, because Jesus is always arriving. He's always at hand, and he's already here all at the same time. It's we who make the linear sort of interpretation. But if you look at it from the other side of the desk, everything is happening at once. It's all here. It's all now. And so this idea of waiting for this return of the master, it's just that as soon as we become quote unquote ready, as soon as we allow ourselves to go that little bit out of focus, then we realize the master is already here. But to stay awake, to stay alert, to stay aware, to stay present is really the message that Jesus is talking about here. Just stay present, because then everything is realized in that moment. And another really important point that he makes here is that, best of all, God's judgment is actually redemption, but we must first know that at the soul level. This really came home to me when I was looking at the Old Testament, actually. And the book of Judges, you've heard about the book of Judges. And early in Israel's history, before they became a monarchy, they had the system of judges. And the judges, a judge in Hebrew is shaphat. Shaphat means judge. And what it signified were these people that would come out of obscurity during the time of a national crisis. Either the enemy was at the border and they were being attacked, or something was happening, and they had no king. They had no central leader. There were 12 independent tribes with their own system of government. But this leader would come out of obscurity, gather the army, galvanize all the tribes, and then do what needed to be done, and then go back into obscurity afterwards. It's a perfect system. Wouldn't it be great if Congress only convened when we needed them and then they went away? I mean, that would be perfect. Doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
At any rate, I digress. But the idea here is this shafat, this judge, their primary role was as deliverer, not as judge in the way we think. They were the ones who came to save, to redeem, to deliver the people from the difficulties or the crisis that they were facing. Now, in the process of that, while they were in power, they would also adjudicate. And so they could sit, and resolve whatever needed to be resolved, but that wasn't their primary responsibility. So we think of the judge as the one who's going to condemn us or damn us and send us to everlasting conscious torment. But the truth of the matter is that the judge is the deliverer, the one who brings us through. And so what he says here is right in line with that. God's judgment is actually redemption. That's God's business. God is redemption. God is love. God is forgiveness. God is all of those things, healing, whatever is good. God is that. And that's all you're ever going to get from God, because God isn't anything else but all that stuff, according to Jesus. You get close to him, that's what you get. You want to go away and stand in the shade, you can do that too. That's up to you. But it's only as long as you continue to stand in the shade, because as soon as you come out in the sun, there you are, right? It's that kind of deal. And so it's always here. It's always now. And it's always coming, right? And it's always at hand. It's all those things at once. All right. Complete confusion?
I have a couple of questions. First off, I have two questions. Actually, one question and more of a statement. I've always been confused at what time is when the cock crows. The second part is, I know that sounds very sophomoric and even humorous. Well, when is that? I mean, is that 4:30 in the morning when people get home from the bars? Or
It is out here in Norco.
Oh, there's Scotty.
Absolutely. I've been here for a while. Thank you, Kathy.
Actually, John, when we hear the cock crows, we think of it as the actual rooster crowing that happens around dawn, right? But
Yeah.
most likely what it's referring to is the end of the midnight or the middle morning watch. The timekeeping in the first century, at least Roman timekeeping, every 3 hours was a different watch. So from 12 midnight to 3 in the morning was a watch, and from 3 to 6 was another watch, and then 3 to 9, so on and so forth. Well, the watch that ended at 3 in the morning, there would be a trumpet or a horn or something that would be blown from the fortress at Antonia in Jerusalem, and that was called the cock's crow. So the end of that watch was the technical name for it, the cock's crow. So most likely that's what it's referring to. So it'll be 3 in the morning, but maybe it is the rooster making noise as it's waking up. I don't really know. We don't know for sure, but most likely it's the end of that watch. So when he's talking about that, he's talking about, any time of the day or night, these things can happen. Just be ready, be present, be aware, and you can realize that.
Thank you. Well, maybe I'm not. I don't feel like I'm as stupid as I thought I was. But the second part, my statement is redemption, and I have to say that I have viewed redemption as the time, the point at which our life on this level, on this planet, ends when we die. That. And I believe it was you early on in the meeting that said that you were recounting a time when a person was dying, and somebody said to them, "Do you see God?" And the person says, "Yes." And that was just another proof to me that in my own simple, pea-sized brain, that's when redemption occurs. That's when Christ appears to us and redeems us. I mean, and that's always been a bit of source of confusion for me.
Mhm.
But I kind of, and it's like we were discussing earlier, my friend John, when he passed a year ago tomorrow. I don't know why I remember that, but he was such a dear friend. And, my thoughts were very strong when he passed well, Jesus came and got him, and he's with God now, and he sees the stuff we don't see. And I envied him and respect him for that. I had all those, weird, crazy stuff. And it's not just because I'm a survivor of the 60s. But I that's the way I look at it. Crazy?
Did you ask if you're crazy? Was that the last?
Yeah, unless you offer, yes.
No, okay.
No judgments, John.
I'll give you a ride to the next meeting, Scotty.
Thank you. I'll take you up on that.
I don't know if there's actually a question in there, John, or like you said, it was more of a statement, but every one of us is going to have to conceive of things that are inconceivable in our own way. And it's not that our conceptions need to be accurate, it's that our conceptions need to be able to carry us through whatever we face in life so that we can accept life on life's terms and live with hope and gratitude. If what we conceive of theologically, philosophically, in whatever way, allows us to do that, then as far as I'm concerned, it's true, quote unquote, until it isn't anymore, until the next trauma comes through and blows it all up, and then we have to remake meaning all over again. But so it's not so important the way that you conceive it. What's important is what it does for you. The way we've been putting it lately, it doesn't matter. It's not about what you believe, it's what difference it makes that you believe.
Right.
And so each one of us has to become convinced of what we're convinced of and run with that in faith until we need to remake meaning all over again because we get overtaken by a loss that pulls it all down. And I think that's another one of the oscillations of the human condition, is moving from meaning to meaning. And that's how we grow. Each wounding creates another hero's journey. It's the beginning of another hero's journey in which we can create more expansive meaning and accommodate more of what we've experienced in life. And that's the ascension. It's that corkscrew, right? As we go up. But it's always preceded by the descent before the next ascent.
Dave, one of my clients is, I think the religion is called Zoroastrianism or something like that.
Zoroastrian.
Say that again.
Zoroastrianism.
Zoroastrianism.
There you go.
And the way they approach things is basically at the moment of your death, there's a scale that measures all the good you've done against all the bad you've done. And, whichever way it tips is the way you end up going. And I like that, what you were just talking about, John, reminded me of this guy, but it works for him in the sense that in every moment, there is a sense of presence about doing good versus doing bad. And, this redemption idea, I think it really works with that scale approach. It still has a judgment. I don't like the unconditional love part. I'm not sure where that would fit in there, but I like it as a method.
Well, if you like it, William, and it allows you to accept life on life's terms and live with hope and gratitude, then you go for it, buddy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I equate it with like Santa Claus, right? He has a naughty list and a nice list. So I never liked that. He's making a list of what I did wrong in life. But I want to add,
Zoro's not a friend of yours then, right?
No. But I wanted to add to what John Hartman said about redemption at the end of life. I come to the realization I don't wait till the end of my life to do these redemptions or redeeming things. Like last night we were saying about making amends. I've done it to my daughters, and if I have to do it again and again, I will do it again and again. I don't wait till the end of my life. And then the other one too, when you said, this was in the beginning, a passage threatening or punitive, as Jesus is saying, you're saying to, in our death in the future, maybe in the far future. To me, the way I see things now is, I can die tonight, I can die tomorrow. So how I live now, like I'm here in the Zoom, I was invited to another thing, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't. I have a book study. I prefer to be here. So I had to choose which one, but I prefer. But I thought about, like, when I was a kid, you wait till the very last to eat that dessert because, oh, that was the most pleasurable thing. I don't have to wait till tomorrow for that. However, it's also the balance. I do not, it's not the hedonistic lifestyle, right? Okay, oh my gosh, tomorrow I might die, so I'm going to do this and this, but it's not that. But it's, like you said too, it's, if I had to have a choice, I mean, yeah, I had to have a choice, and I choose what gave me the most pleasure.
In all these as we pull these threads together, it seems like inevitably, if you put two Christians in a room and let them talk long enough, they're going to end up at the judgment. They're going to end up at heaven and hell. That's just where we naturally go because it's so central to our theology and to our cultural religion. And then we always end up here. And I've thought long and hard about this because if we really take Jesus' teaching seriously, if we really take seriously what Jesus is saying about the nature of the Father and the nature of the Father's love, then judgment isn't God's judgment about us. It's about really our judgment about God. God isn't judging us based on a scale so much of what's good and bad and then saying you're in or you're out by that. That scale is measuring whether we have become people who can see God as God is and as not as we imagine God to be, which is a whole different thing. Have we become people who can see life in the world transparently enough that we can see God as a God that we would never expect? Because we don't expect a humble, vulnerable God. We don't expect a God who is unassuming. We expect the king on top of the throne. That's what we're always looking for. But Jesus is telling us that our God is washing our feet. So that's such a disconnect. If we haven't become people who value those traits that Jesus is talking about, humility, vulnerability, service, then we're going to walk right past God. And we are making a judgment about God, not God about us. God is always welcoming. God is always forgiving. God is always redeeming, but we'll miss it completely. That's the way I look at this whole situation now. Throw that into the mix of what you're looking at and see where it lands, if anywhere. But I think we need to really wipe the slate clean and look at this whole thing with radically different perspective if we're ever going to let Jesus' teaching seep into us. And I think a lot of what Rohr is saying, what Merton is saying, is pointing in that same direction, especially this little passage here of Rohr's. But it's going to be radically different, I think, especially if we're still thinking legally.
John, I'd like to respond to your thought and still kind of processing it and considering it. But one of the things that I've observed with clients over the last 50 years, but also what I've experienced in my own life, is that I believe that I've had moments of redemption all throughout the course of my life.
Agreed, and me as well.
Yeah. And I think at those times, we're presented with the opportunity to see God a little bit more clearly, or understand God a little bit more clearly, and also the opportunity to have a better understanding about how God sees us. I think that comes to completion, after we pass from this earth. But I think that people have these stories. It's funny, we don't tell those stories much, but people have these stories.
appreciate that. You know, the thing about, I want to allude to what Ellen had indicated early on. It's not a matter of um, um, saying I'm sorry during your life and this, that, and the other, but for me, it alludes to, I believe it was when Peter said to Jesus, you know, I've done well. I've been a good boy all my life. You know, I want to follow you. And then Jesus says, sell all your things and then follow me. And my experience has been such that I have learned the joy of learning how to follow him without regard to, you know, my lands, my crops, whatever. However you look at it. My joy has been in the relationship I have found of having a massive amount of gratitude, not for what I want or anything, but what he has left. Because you know, in one spot I could say, well, there's not much of me left from what I used to be, but what I used to be, not a whole lot of what I want now. But what he has left has opened my eyes to something a lot greater than what I ever could have imagined in the past. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. It does to me in my pea brain, but you know, that's just where I sit. And Brady, I appreciate your thoughts. And I mean, you have been at that point. And I was going to ask when you had your experience, or Patricia, you said, was there a realization or a vision? It's like,
Patricia, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Do you want to say anything about that?
You go ahead first, and then if I have anything to add, I don't know if I fully understand the question. A realization of what?
John, I'll do the best I can to kind of capture some words I've used in the past to try and answer. I shared here not too long ago that I've come to believe that this experience I had was certainly one of the body was dying, it died, ceased to breathe, and heart had stopped. And I was no longer there. I can no longer see, I can no longer hear. I had entered a different state. I'll just put it that way, a different state. And I also have come to believe at this point, at least I'm convinced of, that what I was experiencing wasn't a time and it wasn't a space. It was a state for me, a personal state, a human state. And I described it last time we talked about it as I feel like that was like kingdom. But then I've had further thoughts. I've read more and more recently about ego death. Jung called it death of the psychic death, the death of the ego, the absence of ego, and that's the way I always described it. So for me, it was a place where all I could do was like a baby, like an unborn baby. All I could do was just experience. And at a later date, when I had language, I could go back and describe it, which is what I've done. But at that time, it was just experience, just experiencing forgiveness, just experiencing grace, just experiencing love, which is, Dave, I think you've been talking about sometimes about that immature state. But what was so interesting is what followed that was I was given a choice to come back. And all of a sudden I'm introduced to free will. I was like, I wasn't a acting agent. I was just in this state. And all of a sudden now I'm an acting agent. I've been given the choice to come back, which is the choice I made. So the best way to experience, to convey to you though, is that using the words I've used before, in that state, I was just made to know. There was no vision because it was absolutely black, dark. And there was no sounds. It wasn't a voice, but rather I was made to know the things that I was made to know. And then given this choice, and all of a sudden I'm an agent again, and I'm making choices, and I'm using free will. And here we are.
Thank you.
It in that context, the word care makes perfect sense to me, right? Because when you're in this state, you didn't care about anything. You weren't invested in anything. I don't know if I'm being too obtuse with that, but
No, that, I like that. That's a good way to put it, I think. Yeah.
John, I would like to address something you said about judgment.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I felt, excuse me, go ahead.
Yes.
He said, you go ahead.
Okay, I felt no judgment. Any judge, I didn't have the typical life review, but I was out of my body experiencing. And there was the only judgment came from myself. And it came with a regret. And the only regret I had was that I didn't enjoy this earthly experience more, that I didn't embrace it and find joy in it more. That I had a mistaken belief that life was overcoming one trial after another. So it really changed my experience when I came back. I was not given the free will of a choice of coming back or not. But they told me the reason I wasn't given the choice was I was too stubborn and I would have never gone back. that they were honoring my daughter's prayers that brought me back.
Ooh,
So I know
intercessory prayer.
yeah, she has much more power than I do with God.
It's
But-
funny. I wanted to share that as I'm listening to these shares, that as Christians or people who come to identify with Christ and all the reasons we hold back and we put little things in secret closets and we develop our faith and before we bring them out to play with in our lives. And we're so afraid that if we attach ourselves to God, we'll have to pay attention to all the rules and life will become so small and controlled. And when the truth is the more we find out about God's love and the way he operates, the more we realize life becomes so expansive, so amazingly large, and it's just mind-boggling. I hear it in your guys' stories and I hear it in your shares and the hope that you have that something good is happening here. And I'm just really overwhelmed to be part of this group, and I thank you for allowing me to participate in it.
All right. Give me one more minute so that I can finish this section and warm my OCD heart. You ready? Most of us just repeat the same routines every day. And if we're upset, if there are any interruptions to our, let me start that again. Most of us just repeat the same routines every day and we're upset if there are any interruptions to our patterns. Yet God is invariably and ironically found in the interruptions, the discontinuities, the exceptions and the surprises, and seldom in the patterns. God has to literally catch us off guard. And we keep coming back to that over and over again. As long as we are looking at the thing, right? It's all opaque. It's when we step back and we just kind of relax and let go. Now the opening is there for God to be able to come in, to have that door cracked and we can see the there out there, another there out there. And when something like that happens, then as he says, I can say to myself just this moment is all there is. This moment is enough. This moment is transparently shining through everything that is. I don't need anything more. Not yet doesn't matter. It doesn't make any sense. You know, it's even in the midst of things I don't want, don't expect, and sometimes don't like, in the evening, midnight, cock crow, or in the morning, at all times. And so it comes back down to that ability to just let things come out of focus. Don't be grabbing on mentally onto things and holding onto them and unwrapping that package. If we can just see everything as a whole, everything in the whole and the whole in everything, then a different kind of reality opens up in front of us. That's the contemplative or mystical experience that we're looking for. All right. We went over, but it was a good over.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Another great conversation as always. All right, Scott.
Lord, thank you for this night, this moment, this time, this get together of loving friends and those that are seeking to find out more and more about you and the journey that's made possible by having a relationship with you. We're very grateful, Father, for the opportunities that you provide for us and the love that you have planned from the beginning to lavish on our lives. And although we don't always understand the things that happen to us and how they're going to work out for the good, we understand you and your love, which supersedes all of it, overcomes all of our doubts. So we're grateful, Father God. Thank you for loving us. We pray and we give our thanks and we say our amens in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks,
Amen.
everyone. We will see you on Sunday, one way or another.
Good night, guys.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Again, thanks, Kathy, for the catch.
See you next week.
Hope Marion feels better, Dave. Give her our
What's that,
best.
Kathy?
I said, hope Marion feels better. Give her
I
our
do
best.
too, and I hope she
Hope
comes
she's better
home
by
tomorrow
Sunday.
because I miss her.
Yeah.
In 3
Oh,
days.
gosh.
So we'll see. Yeah, she did say she was feeling better by the afternoon, and she took some Dayquil, but she wasn't able to get to the clinic out there because she was really just tending to her parents, and so
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
they just
Poor
brought her
thing.
mother home this afternoon. So, but she seems
It's
to
a
be
lot of
doing
extra
well.
stress to do all that.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. So
Well, but I hope she's feeling better by Sunday.
thanks. Me too. All right.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody. Bye, Jordana. Bye, Scotty.
Bye.
Yeah.
See you guys.